You can go through an entire workday without your abandonment wound getting touched, run errands, have surface level conversations, move through routine. None of your deepest beliefs about yourself get poked. But then you go home to your partner or you get a text from someone you care about, and suddenly everything is activated. That is not a coincidence. And in this video, I'm going to explain exactly why. This is part 3 of my Core Wounds series, why your closest relationships activate you most. I am Stacey, a psychotherapist and a certified integrative attachment theory coach. Links to parts 1 and 2 are in the description. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss parts 4 and 5. Let's get into it. Welcome to lesson 3, how core wounds show up in your relationships. So far, we have covered what core wounds are, where they come from, and how to use your emotions to trace them. In this lesson, we are going to look at where they tend to show up most visibly and most painfully, which is your closest relationships. And I want to start by saying something that I think matters a lot. Your relationships are not where your wounds were created, but they are almost always where they get activated the most. Because closeness requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is exactly what state your nervous system was wired to protect you from, if that is what you learned early on. So, why relationships activate wounds so fast? Think about it this way. You can go through an entire workday without your abandonment wound getting touched. You can run errands, have surface level conversations, move through your routine, and none of your deepest beliefs about yourself get poked. But then you go home to your partner, or you get a text from someone you care about, or you have a moment of vulnerability with a close friend, and suddenly everything is activated. That is not a coincidence. The more we care about someone, the more our nervous system has at stake. And the more at stake, the more sensitive the wound detector becomes. This is why people often feel like their most triggered, reactive, unrecognizable version of themselves shows up specifically in intimate relationships. It's not because they're broken, it's because that is where the old programming gets the most airtime. How specific wounds drive specific patterns. Let me walk through some of the most common wounds and show you what they actually look like in a relationship context. The abandonment wound. This one tends to show up as a constant low-level monitoring of the relationship, checking in more than feels comfortable, needing reassurance that things are okay, feeling a spike of anxiety when a partner is quiet, distracted, or seems slightly off, reading into tone of voice, response times, body language. The behavior on the surface looks like neediness or clinginess, but underneath, it is a nervous system that learned at some point that people leave and has been scanning for evidence of that ever since. The not enough wound. This one often shows up as either overgiving or overachieving in relationships, doing more, being more, trying harder, all in an attempt to secure love by being useful or impressive enough to keep. It can also show up as intense self-criticism after conflict, replaying conversations, wondering what you did wrong, assuming that if things go sideways, it is because of something lacking in you. The unsafe or trapped wound. This one tends to look like emotional withdrawal, especially when things get intense, a need for significant alone time, discomfort with deep emotional demands from a partner, sometimes a pattern of keeping one foot slightly out the door even in otherwise good relationships. The person is not cold or uncaring. Their nervous system just learned that too much closeness or too much emotional weight means losing themselves or getting hurt. The I do not matter wound. This one shows up a lot as difficulty asking for what you need directly, hinting, waiting to be noticed, feeling resentful when needs go unmet, but never having named them out loud. Because if you asked and you are still not prioritized, that feels like devastating confirmation of the wound. When two wounds meet. Here is where it gets really interesting and also really hard. In most relationships, both people have wounds, and those wounds don't just exist side by side. They interact with each other in ways that can create cycles that feel completely impossible to break. The most common one is when someone with an abandonment wound is in a relationship with someone who has an unsafe or trapped wound. When the abandonment wound gets activated, that person moves closer. They reach out more. They want reassurance. They need to feel the connection is still there. But that very reaching out activates the unsafe wound in their partner. Suddenly there is pressure, emotional weight, a feeling of being crowded or controlled. So that person pulls back to regulate, which activates the abandonment wound even more, which makes the first person reach harder, which makes the second person retreat further. Neither person is wrong. Both nervous systems are doing exactly what they were programmed to do. But without awareness of the wounds underneath, the cycle just keeps running. Awareness is what breaks it. The story we tell about our partner. One thing I want to touch on in this lesson because it matters a lot. When our wounds get activated by someone we love, we almost always create a story about what their behavior means. And that story is almost never about them. It's about us. They went quiet and we decided they are withdrawing love. They made plans without asking and we decided we are often an afterthought. The wound generates the interpretation, and then we respond to the interpretation as if it is fact. Learning to catch that story, the one your wound is writing about your partner's behavior, is one of the most powerful things you can do for a relationship. Because most of the time, your partner is not doing what your wound thinks they are doing. They're just being a person. And your wound is filling in the gaps with its oldest and most painful material. In the next lesson, we are going to go through the full list of core wounds so you can start identifying which ones feel most familiar to you. That specificity really matters because the more clearly you can name a wound, the more clearly you can work with it. I will see you in lesson 4. If this resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series. And if you want to go even deeper, I have a full library of mini courses on attachment healing and relationship patterns on Inside Timer. This series is just a taste of what is over there. The link is in the description. I will see you in the next one.